Hello and welcome to this third session, the early challenges to the Weimar Republic. We're going to try our best to understand why this Treaty of Versailles was so unpopular and hated in Germany. I think it'll be quite easy when we've done it for you to make your own mind up, and also understand the roots of why this becomes the catalyst, if you like, for what comes next. Okay, so first things first, before we start getting into this, as always, a little think about the topic. So look at this picture on the screen. You can pause the video if you want and have a little look at it, and then we'll go through some of the key bits, thinking about some of your inference skills that we've been practicing recently. Okay, so here we have a script, the terms to the German people. They must pay for all damages to civilians on land or sea or from the air, and it's being presented to the Germans on the end of a sword. All right, so you can see the reaction of the German military. He looks angry, he looks shocked perhaps, maybe a bit of a surprise, and you can see the determined, angry stance of Foch. He's the guy presenting this to the German people. All right, so already we can get the idea that this is presented in an aggressive way. It's a surprise, it's a shock, I think we can see on this German military man's face, and just the sheer fact it's presented at the end of a sword will give us a bit of an idea about where we're going with this. Okay, so it's a really important topic, arguably the most important topic of all, certainly in the early part of the Germany story, but we'll keep referring back to Versailles from this session onwards. Okay, let's go. So the Republic, as we know, is slightly unpopular at the start, following the abdication of Kaiser Wilhelm II. Remember that the people in Germany, they are a bit angry that they think that the government, Ebert's new Weimar Republic, has stabbed them in the back by signing this armistice. All right, so we can think about the inevitability of this, but lots of German people, they thought they were winning the war. They want to know, why did we give up? Why did you sign the armistice? The Kaiser told us we were winning. They just didn't get it at all, so they are angry. And this term that comes from this is that they were referred to in the press particularly as the November criminals, and that's because they signed the treaty in November. Okay, so when we see the term November criminals going forward, it just really refers to the government, who people believed have stabbed them in the back, and the word for that, remember, is Dolchstoss. Okay, so the Republic is not going particularly well so far, and the Treaty of Versailles is certainly not going to make that any easier. So here we are at Versailles. So Versailles is just outside of Paris. The Treaty of Versailles was signed in the Palace of Versailles. So if you remember back to Key Stage 3, when we did the French Revolution and King Louis XVI's house, or where he lived, was the Palace of Versailles. So you can see on the screen the bound book version of the Treaty of Peace, they called it. Okay. It was signed in June 28th, 1919. All right, and the title of it was the Assistance to France in the Event of Unprovoked Aggression by Germany. So straight away we can see that this is something particularly France might be involved in. And in this picture you can see to the right of the book lots of men discussing what to do. We can see the leaders right in the middle of Britain, France and America, as well as some other people. Okay, so it's signed on the 28th of June 1919, so that's a good 8 months after the end of the war. Okay, so it's taken a little bit of time to iron out some of the ideas that the Allies would like to have in this. Okay, so this is going to be the first reason why the people hate the Weimar Republic. All right, so it's decided by Britain, France and America, predominantly, so the Allies. So let's have a little look at who these people are. So the Prime Minister of Great Britain is a man called David Lloyd George. Now, he's got a bit of a tricky story because he's got an election at home, a general election coming up. And obviously we've just been through this war. So we've got lots of angry people who've lost their husbands, their sons, their brothers. They're upset, the country's devastated. All of the same kind of things that we've seen in Germany. And this guy's got a general election. So think about it before we move on. Can he honestly go into this general election being nice to Germany or saying positive things about rebuilding relations or any of those kinds of things? Is that going to go down well at home? So his dilemma is that he wants to publicly attack Germany. He wants to look strong. He wants to look like he's going to get revenge or something out of this to help deal with the aftermath of World War One. But at the same time, he's not soft, and he also knows that he needs a stronger Germany in the middle of Europe, particularly due to the worry of communism spreading after the Russian Revolution. So there's lots of things going on, and obviously he's concerned about trade as well. So publicly, David Lloyd George is going to be wanting to attack Germany, and he says that he wants to squeeze them till the pips squeak. That's one of his famous quotes of this. But at the same time, he wants to make sure Germany isn't destroyed too much, so that this is good for trade and perhaps a buffer to any potential spreading of communism from the east. Okay, so that's the leader of Britain. Georges Clemenceau, he's the leader of France. Now we can see he's got quite a distinctive facial feature. So this moustache will come in handy when we look at some sources at the end of this session. So just recognise when you see any cartoon that has a man with a moustache like this that it's referring to Georges Clemenceau. Now he, on the other hand, unlike David Lloyd George, he absolutely wants to destroy Germany. He's angry at the damage that's been done to France. And don't forget the trenches, they went all the way down through France, destroyed the countryside, and obviously most of the fighting was done on the Western Front. All the shell damage, many French villages and towns have been destroyed. So he really wants Germany finished. He wants compensation, he wants an end to Germany, but partly as well, and I think we can understand this, is he is worried about the Germans attacking again, because geographically, France and Germany are in fact neighbours. So Georges Clemenceau, he's going to take quite a lead in this Treaty of Versailles. Just keep that in mind as we go. He wants Germany never to be able to start a war again. And this probably goes back quite historically, really, in the whole empire building. Maybe a little bit of jealousy, who can say. So that is the leader of France and Britain. Two different characters all coming together at the Palace of Versailles to try and punish Germany in a fair way or to destroy them. Okay, so here we have Woodrow Wilson. He is the President of the United States of America, and obviously the Americans have been involved in the war. They got involved just before the end. They have previously offered the Germans a way out of World War One by ending the war and getting rid of the king. They asked, get rid of Kaiser Wilhelm II and end the war, and then a punishment won't be so harsh. So obviously that's what happened in the end. So when we see the Treaty of Versailles shortly, you can understand why the German people felt a little bit let down in the fact that they felt they'd been promised fairly reasonable treatment and leniency if they got rid of the king and ended the war, which is what they did. And in actual fact, the Treaty of Versailles was incredibly harsh anyway. God knows what it would have been like had they not followed Woodrow Wilson's advice. So he's an idealist, Woodrow Wilson. He's got this idea that everything can be okay if we all just get around the table and talk. He is also very concerned with the spread of communism, so a strong Germany in the middle of Europe would be useful for him, and of course a little bit of trade as well. Okay, so one of the things Woodrow Wilson does, just as an aside, is he sets up the League of Nations. It's his idea, in this idea of all of these countries together to stop any future war like this again. Now, obviously, you'll immediately think, well, World War II, that didn't work. And you're right, the League of Nations was a failure, didn't last at all, wasn't very successful. And obviously by the time we get to 1939 we have World War II, but at least the idea was there, and it was quite a useful idea. Like I say, Woodrow Wilson was an idealist. Okay, so we've got a bit of an idea of the three leaders of the Allies. They are the ones coming to the Palace of Versailles ready to end this war officially with a treaty. Okay, when you sign a treaty it becomes legally binding. So let's have a little look. Now what I would like you to do as we talk through this is just listen first of all. We'll have plenty of opportunity to try and recall the terms of the treaty, but you need to know the terms of the Treaty of Versailles backwards, upside down, and every other way. Okay, it's a really important part of the story. So one of the best ways for me to try and remember this is that we use BRAT. Okay, so B-R-A-T to help us remember the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. So we'll see as we go through the next little bit what each of those letters stand for. You can write this in your book or on your paper once we've gone through the terms. Okay, so the first thing to consider is that Germany has to admit full responsibility for starting this war. This is the War Guilt Clause 231. So effectively, Germany has to say, okay, we started the war, it's all our fault, every single bit of it, so therefore once we've taken the blame, we have to take the punishment as well. Okay, so this is what the B will be. This is blame for the war. Now, you remember that World War One was started for many reasons: empire building, the shooting of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, all of that story that we looked at in Key Stage 3 was the setting up of World War One. Possibly you could argue that each country has played their own part in this, in the building up of tensions in Europe and the alliances and the different groups that form together. Whatever it is, whatever you think the cause of World War One was, at the end of the Treaty of Versailles, Germany is going to take full blame and full acceptance. The War Guilt Clause 231. Okay. Germany is also going to have to pay compensation. Now, obviously, once they've taken the blame and said, okay, we started the war, it's our fault, then it's only right that they then pay compensation. And we call the compensation at the end of this story reparations. And that is what the R stands for. So as they're responsible, they have to pay the reparations, and it is a huge £6.6 billion. Now, that may not sound an awful lot in today's money, but that is a huge amount, particularly when you think about the war damages already. Now, they are already damaged up to the value of about £37 billion, remember, from the war. So adding another 6.6 billion really is going to just tip them over the edge and really bankrupt the country without a shadow of a doubt. And remember, this is what Georges Clemenceau wants. So Germany is in no way position to pay this. They can't afford it. They have no chance. And if we start thinking about why the German people got angry and upset, well, we'll see. The reparations alone might be a reason for this. And this is going to cause all sorts of economic problems in Germany on top of the situation that we've already looked at in the last couple of sessions. So the reparations of £6.6 billion. Okay. Then third, the League of Nations was set up, as we've said. That was the idea, that we're going to try and stop another war on the scale of World War One, and each country would be in this group together. Obviously, Germany would not be allowed at first, which is important because Germany is to be punished. We'll come back to the League of Nations in a few sessions' time in 1926, when Germany is in fact allowed to join the League of Nations as they start to improve their relationship with the world. Okay. So then we get to arguably the most important and probably the easiest to remember really is the A. So Germany's army was affected significantly. So they were only allowed 100,000 soldiers. Okay, so if you think about that, that's probably a football stadium and a half, or one of the big football stadiums in Spain. Just that many people is what they've got to defend their country. A lot of people felt scared, angry. This wasn't fair. Every country should have the right to defend themselves. How can you possibly defend yourself with only 100,000 soldiers? Okay, as well as that, they were allowed no tanks. They couldn't have any air force, so the Luftwaffe was disbanded. They were only allowed 6 battleships, no submarines, 6 cruisers, 12 destroyers, and 12 torpedo boats. So basically, what Clemenceau has clearly pushed for here is that Germany would never be in a position ever again to invade or attack any other country. And that is the point, really, isn't it? But when you add that to the reparations and just the psychological impact of having to take the blame, you can see perhaps why the German people were really shocked and really upset by the Treaty of Versailles. So Germany is in no position to fight anyone ever again, really. This affects their pride. Lots of German people were very proud of their empire, just like we were, the British Empire. They were proud of their strong army. So this really was a real kick in the teeth to have your army taken away from you. A little bit embarrassing as well, really. Like, you'd never think in a million years that this would be signed. These terms of this treaty, they do seem very, very harsh. And we'll have a little think about why Ebert did sign it shortly. But I just need you to understand just how important this was in causing this anger, or this seed of anger in Germany that would eventually grow into this Nazi party. And everyone who was angry, they felt a connection to what the Nazi party was saying because of their anger towards this Treaty of Versailles. All right, so the next one, the last one, is the T. This is related to territory. Okay, so any land or anything that Germans might have had. So slightly linked back to point number 4 in the army is the Rhineland was demilitarized. The Rhineland is on the coast of France and Germany. The border, sorry. So we can we can understand why that would need to be demilitarized. That means all military has been taken out of the Rhineland. So there's no standing German army next to France, basically, because of their fear of an imminent German attack. As well as that, Alsace-Lorraine was a very small piece of land, really, that had been taken by the Germans in the Franco-Prussian War, and the French wanted it back. So it's just a little bit of sort of retribution or revenge, really, from that previous war in the 19th century. And Alsace-Lorraine was given back to France. They also lost 11 of their African colonies. All right, so the African colonies, part of the German Empire, brought in wealth, minerals, diamonds, resources, men even, to fight, just like the British Empire. And all those African colonies were taken and they were made independent or absorbed by the Allies. They were also very proud of their empire, so losing these colonies was important too. And then the last part of the Treaty of Versailles that really is important for us is that Germany could not form an Anschluss or a union with Austria. Okay, so Austria, again, on the border of Germany, together they were quite a strong force. They fought together. So Austria-Hungary was obviously part of the German alliance during the war. So Germany could not form an Anschluss or union with Austria. Again, the idea being to minimize its potential power and chance to fight. So overall, that is the terms of the Treaty of Versailles that we really need to know for our exam. There's a lot more to it, but just for now, this is what we need. And to keep into context that the people were unhappy, deeply unhappy with the Treaty of Versailles, and particularly with Ebert and this new Weimar Republic for signing the treaty. Okay, so that's where we are. So blame, reparations, army, and territory. Okay, so if you'd rather remember LAM, but LAM is another way that you can remember. So LAM would be land, army, military, and blame. Any way you need to remember the terms of the treaty is a good idea. So there's the Treaty of Versailles signed in June 1919. What I'd like you to do is just pause this video, have a look at the screen, and then try and rewrite the terms of the treaty underneath each of those letters B, R, A, and T without looking at the screen. So have a quick look and then maybe turn it off and see what you can remember, and try and do this a couple of times. We'll do this again shortly. It's just one of those really important things to get into our memory, into long-term memory as well, and practice. Practicing to write them down is the easiest way to do this. Okay, so have a go at that and then we'll carry on. Okay, hopefully that was you remembered quite a lot by writing them down, but the more you practice, the clearer this will be. Okay, so one last thing about the Treaty of Versailles, which was important in causing an awful lot of anger, was that it was called a diktat. Okay, so a diktat, in other words, it was dictated to Germany. They had no say at all, no negotiation. In fact, Ebert probably wasn't even in the room when the Allies decided on the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and then he was given this and forced to sign it. Now, you might say to yourself, well, why didn't he just not sign it? Because it's harsh. Think about the situation in Germany. Think about how chaotic it is, the crisis, the economic crisis, the riots, the lot. He can't afford it. If he doesn't sign this Treaty of Versailles, then the Allies will just simply invade Germany and finish the job militarily. So Ebert really had no choice, and we've got to try and get that point across as well. But you try telling that to a German who is suffering emotionally, economically, all sorts of things, and then they read this in the newspaper the next morning that the German Republic has just signed, effectively Germany away. Okay, so the diktat is important. Okay, so just to get a bit of an idea of what this might be in Germany, I'm not going to try and do this in German, but you might hear them saying things like, "Are you kidding me?" There are the most severe and harsh terms ever. Why, Ebert? Why have you agreed to them? You will regret agreeing to these terms. Now, in actual fact, there is going to be some fallout of this. It's called the Nazi Party, but Ebert, he'll be long gone before that happens. But there is going to be a fallout. So Ebert, he's going to come back and he's going to be like, well, actually, it's not quite the case. They dictated these terms to us. We had no say. We couldn't negotiate. It was a diktat. We asked for concessions, but they were refused. So I suppose before we move on, you've got an opportunity to think about, is Ebert like wrong for signing the Treaty of Versailles? Should he have fought harder? Could he have? He's in a real difficult position here. And remember, he's at the beginning of his job. The Weimar Republic is brand new, and this is what it's starting out on, the Treaty of Versailles. So you can imagine on June the 29th, when this thing is published in the newspapers, when the people read this, they are going to be appalled. And Ebert knows this, and there really wasn't an awful lot that he could do, was there? Okay, so what was the German reaction to the Treaty of Versailles? They're humiliated. They're angry. They just can't believe it, actually, to be fair. The fact that it was a diktat and they had no say in it, this was just unfair. This is not how you avoid future wars. The idea, particularly if you are Woodrow Wilson, is to talk about these issues and try and avoid military conflict at all costs. So that's one thing. Obviously, the November criminals, they're already reeling from that. This new republic, the Dolchstoss theory that we've talked about already. Overall, this is just disastrous in Germany. It is a wonder that the Weimar Republic survived as long as it did, with this as its starting point, really. And then the guilt humiliated the German people. They felt that it wasn't their fault for World War One. They were as angry. They said it was the British's fault. The dreadnoughts, if you know about that, they felt that the empire building was more important, and how dare Britain have an empire and Germany couldn't. So they believed that actually it wasn't their fault, and they perhaps were just supporting the whole Archduke Franz Ferdinand. They were supporting their allies. So to be told that it was your fault, and I suppose you could think of this, if in school you've ever been blamed for something, and you've got in trouble and it just wasn't your fault, I suppose you could understand a little bit how these German people felt. The normal German people in the street, not the politicians, not the military, but the normal everyday German people. These are the people who will at some point vote for the Nazis, because they appeal. It just appeals with this root cause of their anger. Okay, so the terms of the Treaty of Versailles as well, they have left the country just destroyed, weak economically, militarily, they're insecure, they can't defend themselves. So again, the people are just feeling particularly angry about this. They've lost 13% of their population because countries that they once owned or had, they were made independent, and Germany was cut up. So what was once Germany is now Poland. And all sorts of things like this affects the mindsets of the people, but they've lost about 13% of their population, which has financial and social consequences as well, particularly if you once class yourself as German and now you're part of Poland. And we'll have a little look at this later on as well as we get closer to World War II, particularly with Hitler's invasion of Poland. He believed that he was just taking back the German land that was given away or lost in the Treaty of Versailles. So yes, the Germans are bitter and they're angry, they're sad, they're disappointed, they're shocked, all of these emotions times by 100. And that should give us some idea as to why the Treaty of Versailles is going to form the basis of all things coming as we go forward. And then lastly, obviously that financial impact of £6.6 billion reparations on top of the already almost bankrupt Germany, as well as losing your African colonies that might have helped pay for some of that. It was just an absolute annihilation of Germany. Brat, have a little go, pause the screen and write down what you can remember of the Treaty of Versailles a second time. Don't look at your previous attempt, and see how we get on. All right, hopefully you got a few more this time. So here is our blame, reparations, army and territory, and a little image to try and help summarize the 4 categories of the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so hopefully you've got at least 2 from each box. Next time you have a go at this, try and get a few extras, particularly when it comes to the army and territory part of it. I think the blame and reparations is fairly easy, isn't it? 231 and £6.6 billion. 100,000 soldiers, 6 ships, no air force, no submarines, and 11 colonies. They're sort of the main ones that you think, I'll know them, and you'll have plenty to say in your exam answers. They're key facts. Okay, so an interpretation. Let's have another go at these interpretations. Part of the section B of the Germany paper, paper 3. We've had a go already in session 1. So what I want you to do is just pause the screen, pause the video, read this interpretation, and try and work out what the view of this interpretation is from Richard J. Evans, publishing in 2004, The Coming of the Third Reich. That's just the title given to this Germany, Hitler's Germany. Okay, so remember how we set this up? We set it up with the view of interpretation 1 is, and then I can tell this because it says. Okay, so you just pause this, have a little read, and then fill in those two sections there. Remember, this would be a 4 marker, and we would have to do a second interpretation of what that view is, and then we'd have to say what the difference in the two interpretations are. For now, let's just practice this idea of working out what the view of interpretation 1 is. Okay, so hopefully you got a bit of an idea from reading through that, what the view is. Here's what I think the view is, see if we agree or disagree. I think the view of interpretation 1 is that the Treaty of Versailles shocked everyone in how harsh it was. Almost everyone was angry with the terms of the treaty, and that Germany had no say in the treaty at all. So that's what I think Richard Evans is trying to say here, and I can tell this because it says, no one was prepared for the peace terms. It was greeted with horror, as well as the fact that it says the outrage was almost universal, showing that almost everyone was angry, and it ends by saying it was a dictated peace imposed without the possibility of negotiation. So I've picked out several quotes there, possibly more than I need really for this, remembering that we'd only have 5 minutes to do 2 interpretations. But the idea is we've got the view of it, and we've got some quotes to prove or to back up what we think. Hopefully you picked up some of those things as well, and if you've got your own, I'm sure they're equally as valid. All right, so that's the interpretation task. And then we've got this inference task as well, haven't we? So what can you infer about the German reaction to the Treaty of Versailles? This would be question 1 of paper 3, and we need to do 2 inferences. So again, have a little read of source C and work out what it's trying to say. Remember, an inference is something that it makes you think or feel, not necessarily what it says explicitly. Okay, so pause, have a go, and then we'll see what I've got. Okay, so this source is from Deutsche Zeitung, a German newspaper, on the day of the Treaty of Versailles. So pretty fresh in people's emotions. Let's see what we've got. Hopefully we've got something similar, or you've got some of your own. So the first thing that I can infer really from this source is that it's suggesting the German people are outraged at the harshness of the Treaty of Versailles. They feel angry at the government for signing it. Okay, so that's what I've picked up from reading the source, reading between the lines. They're really angry at this German government. They're outraged. So then I need to quote. So I can tell this because it says, and then the quote, there will be revenge for the shame of 1919. I guess the inference here is you only want revenge if you're angry about something. And also it says a disgraceful treaty is being signed. It can only be being signed by Ebert and the government. This is what makes me think that they're angry at the government. So I've got a couple of quotes there to try and back up why I think the inference of this source is that they're angry at the government, because it's the government who are obviously going to sign it, and it talks about it being signed. So possibly I might have 2 inferences or 2 details certainly to back up that. You need to do 2 in the exam, 4 marks. This is source a German poster from 1931. So this is quite a long time after the Treaty of Versailles, and it's an advertising poster of the NSDAP. So the first thing that you'll have seen, no doubt, is the swastika. So this is a Nazi poster advertising a rally that's coming up. A rally is a meeting of lots of people where the Nazi party, probably Hitler, will deliver a speech about something. In this case, it's going to be about the Treaty of Versailles. So just pause the screen, have a little look at it and see what you can work out. What do you think the message is of this poster? Hopefully some bits will jump out at you a little bit more, but think a little bit deeper. Look at his face, his expression, what's going on around, things like that before we have a little look. Okay? Right, so the message of the source then. So this German character, he is looking quite stressed. He's quite angry. All right, so he's got, his hands are in shackles. All right, and the handcuffs, the things that are stopping this German doing what he wants to do, the handcuffs are Versailles, the Treaty of Versailles. So this is 12 years later, and it seems to me that Germany still feels, or the Nazi party still feel, that Germany is shackled by the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. They've never been able to recover or get any sort of freedom. I'm looking at the sort of fire as well. The fire's bad, isn't it? And this guy is surrounded by fire. There's a real sense of anger in this, but again, his face looks quite sad and quite depressed. This is 1931, and you'll know later on, this is during the Great Depression. Germany is really suffering after the Wall Street crash, and this poster is going to appeal to a lot of people. Basically, what the Nazi Party are saying here is they are going to get rid of the Treaty of Versailles, free Germany from all of that oppression and anger, and that appeals. All right, so we can also see the swastika there. That gives us the idea it's the Nazi symbol, and the flames, we've talked about that already. All right, so he's despairing, he's sad and shackled. Hopefully you picked up some of those points from this source. It's a poster, so it's designed to try and get people's attention. It gives the information about the time and the date of where this rally is going to be held and what the topic is going to be about. So for all of those people who are really angry about the Treaty of Versailles, well, they're going to go to this, aren't they? They're going to go to this rally, this meeting. They're going to listen to what Hitler's got to say, and they're going to agree. Because although it's 12 years later, 12 years is not that long a time. People still remember how angry they felt and feel still about the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. All right, so this is going to be what it's all about, as we've said. Unemployment is sky high following the Great Depression. People are angry, and the Nazis are going to take advantage of this at this rally. Just interesting to think of that 12 years later, but still very much linking back to the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so we're going to do some source work now. What I'd like you to think about as we go through these sources are how the sources represent or show the terms of the treaty, how they show Germany's reaction to the treaty, and how they represent or try to show how harsh the treaty was. All right, so 3 focuses to think about as we look at these sources, as well as the content of the sources as well. So this first one, I like this one. It's a bit strange, particularly looking at the character at the top. I don't know what that is really. Is it a woman or is it a man? I think the idea is that it's a bit monstrous really, and not normal, which is, I guess, part of the point. So pause the video and make a few observations about what you see in this source, some of which are really obvious, some of which less so, and then we'll have a little talk through this particular source. Okay, so hopefully you've got a few things noted down here. So the first thing to talk about really before we look at some specifics is the cloud at the top. That may not be the first thing you look at, but let's start at the top and work our way down. So it's dark, isn't it? It's a dark time. This time representing World War I, and I think we can tell that quite easily from this German soldier in his trench. We know it's a trench just because of the barbed wire, and we just know that. And here comes this monstrous man, woman, freaky looking thing coming behind the German soldier who looks strong and brave. He's there fighting and defending this country, and of course Dolchstoss is being stabbed in the back. We can also see some stereotypical characteristics of a Jewish person presented in some of these anti-Semitic posters. The Star of David is on the hat. Effectively, what this might be suggesting is that it was the Jewish monster stabbing the German soldier in the back, just at the point that they thought they were winning this war. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we might want to be thinking about, and obviously the November criminals as well, signing this in November the 11th, 1918. So hopefully you got some of those observations from this picture, this source. It's quite a good source. We're just looking at some content. So thinking back to what we need to look at, how does this represent the terms of the treaty? Does it? Probably not really. How about how Germans felt? So it definitely shows us that, doesn't it? It shows us Dolchstoss. It shows us that they blame the Jews, and it shows us they're really quite angry about this situation. Okay, so just some information there that you can read to make sure that you've got your own idea. And hopefully that picture is a nice starting point to get us in. If we see a picture like this in the exam, it'll no doubt be a source inference question. Okay, so let's have a look at the next one. So pause the screen as well when you see this and start making some notes. I love this source. It's one of my favourite sources ever. I remember when I was in school myself, and the first time I saw this, I just thought that's so good. Okay, so let's have a little look. Pause the video. Before we start, look at the title. It's made in 1920 by an Australian. The people, just so you know, we've got Clemenceau, Woodrow Wilson, and David Lloyd George in there. Have a little think about that. There's some really, really interesting ideas on this. And just in case you can't see that above the little boy crying, it says the class of 1940. Okay, so the title of this one is Peace and Future Cannon Fodder. Okay, so the title is referring to the peace of the Treaty of Versailles, but it's also predicting a future event, future cannon fodder. Cannon fodder is basically those people at the front line or the vanguard of an attack in an army. They're just going to go forward and be killed. Okay, so much like going over the top. Okay, so we can start breaking this down really quite simplistically first of all. So let's have a look at the people. So David Lloyd George at the back. Now, can you think of a reason why David Lloyd George might be presented behind the German and American and Italians? Why is David Lloyd George back there? Thinking about what we've talked about in this session already. So the idea being that he wasn't really that involved in the Treaty of Versailles, didn't want to punish Germany too much. So he's almost sort of in the background, really, just going through the motions, okay? Then we have Woodrow Wilson. So he's obviously very important. So he's more towards the front of these people, coming out of the room at the Palace of Versailles where the Treaty of Versailles was agreed. He's just there. Remember, he's that idealist, so he's sort of middle ground. And then at the front of the men coming out of the Palace of Versailles is Georges Clemenceau. And you can see it's Georges Clemenceau because of that moustache again. So he's coming out and he's at the front. And I think if we're going to get really deep into this, that reflects or represents the idea that he is the one in charge. He's the one really leading this Treaty of Versailles, wanting to punish Germany to within an inch of its life, particularly is what happens. So that is where we are. Now this little boy, or this child, this represents Germany. Now let's think about how you might feel if you were stripped naked and made to stand in assembly. All right, you'd feel pretty awful. So there's a reason why this child, Germany, has been portrayed in this way. There's a vulnerability now to Germany. It's vulnerable. It's being stripped of its clothes. What does that represent? Thinking back to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, it's being stripped of its clothes. In our case, it's been stripped of its army, of its land, of its pride, all of it. Economically, it's been stripped, Germany, and that is what this source is trying to represent. Germany is left vulnerable and open and weak, which is how we'd all feel if we were made to stand naked. Okay, now then just above his head, it says the class of 1940, and this is one of the most incredible things about this source. This source was made in 1920, okay, so 2 years after the war and a year after Versailles, and it predicts that this child, Germany, is one day going to grow up. It's going to grow up, and by 1940, when it's in the class of 1940, it's going to want revenge. Now, the most incredible thing about this is that World War II started in 1939. So as a prediction goes by this Australian, who is on our side, by the way, he's not an ally of Germany, he obviously recognises that there's going to be some fallout from this Treaty of Versailles because it's so harsh. So that is just incredible, really. That's the title, that's the prediction given in this source. But of course, this is going to grow up. You'll know yourself if you've been wronged, that you want to get revenge. And sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes a week, sometimes it takes a year. Whatever it is, you never quite really get over that thing that made you really angry or upset. I talk to many people and they talk about times in primary school when they were really angry or something happened and they never quite got over it. So we can relate, definitely, to what the message of this source is. All right, we can see on the floor the Treaty of Versailles has been thrown. Possibly what's making this little child cry. It's been in trouble, hasn't it? It's been shouted at and it's being punished. So that's why the little child or Germany is crying, facing the wall. And interesting, the tiger, curious, at the bottom of the source, I seem to hear a child weeping. The tiger is what they called Clemenceau. He just seems to hear a child crying, but most people would want to stop if we saw a child crying. He just, I hear a child crying and carries on walking. This is because he wants Germany destroyed. Though don't forget, he's also got to try and please his own French people as well. They've been brutalised in this war too. So we're not going to get into the whole was Clemenceau right or wrong. He's French and he's angry too. But we're looking at it from the point of view of how does the Treaty of Versailles impact the German people. Okay, so this source, I just love it. It's so clever and almost so simple in what it's predicting or what its message is. Okay, so there's a little bit of information at the bottom there just that you can finish this off. Hopefully you picked up some of that as well. If not, just think about a source, how sometimes there is some real hidden messages that we really need to look at and squeeze out based on the knowledge that we know of the event as well. Okay, so the next source, the most common source on Versailles, I'd like to think. So again, we're looking at how does it represent Germans' reaction, Germans' losses, or any other ideas or thoughts that you've got. So pause the screen, make a few ideas, observations on what you think is going on with this source, and then we'll have a look. Okay, so here we are. We've got a picture of a goblin, vampire-y monster type thing. And hopefully the first thing that you can see from this is that it's Clemenceau, and we can see that from the mustache, okay? So you will have hopefully got the idea that this vampire, this monster, is in this room drinking the blood, because you know that's what vampires do, of this woman. Now, this woman, she looks like she's dead or dying, and of course she is, because she's having all of her blood sucked out of her. This woman is going to represent Germany, okay? So just like the other picture where Germany was a innocent, vulnerable child, this is a woman who is fairly vulnerable in her bedroom, okay? So we'll have a little think at the top first and work our way down. We've got these bats outside. Now, they represent Britain and America. So again, think about that idea. Why are they on the outside, not on the inside, doing the damage? Why is it Clemenceau who is the one inside sucking the blood out of Germany? It goes back to this idea that it was Clemenceau was the aggressor. He was the one who really wanted to punish Germany, whereas Britain and America, remember, they didn't really want that to happen. Okay, so we've got Germany on the bed. She's dying. She's being absolutely punished, representing the terms of the Treaty of Versailles. And Georges Clemenceau is presented as the monster, as the alien. Probably you might think to yourself, this is clearly a German source. It's the way it's portraying Clemenceau, or it's certainly a source made by somebody who thinks the Treaty of Versailles is quite harsh. We can also see going on in the background there, the curtains seem to be open. All right, so that window was open that allowed the French or the vampire to come in. Again, that probably takes us back to some of this vulnerability that Germany now has, that it can't shut the window, it can't defend itself anymore, thanks to the military terms of the Treaty of Versailles. Now, I'm sure that no one even thought of that, but if you did, well done. But it's one of those really deep internal messages of a source. So that's the idea. That's a bit of a summary of what we've said, really. And then if we look at the bottom right-hand side of the source, you'll hopefully have worked out there's a helmet, a sword, and a shield. So what does that represent? Okay, so this represents they have no army. There are no soldiers, well there are, but only 100,000 soldiers who can come to the rescue of this woman being attacked by this vampire. In this case, there is no one to defend Germany. That's the message of this source, and the arms have been put down, the soldiers' helmets there without a soldier in it, and that's really all this is saying. So again, a source, there's no words on this source. However, we've been able to talk here for a couple of minutes on what it represents. It is one of my favourite sources as well, and certainly one of the most common sources if we ever get asked the question on Versailles. But just to look at and think about what it's trying to show, and the importance of a source, really, to give us some idea of purpose, perhaps, if we were thinking about why was this source made. Okay, so then this next one, it's a bit less common, a bit more older, this one. We'll just talk about it straight away. You don't need to do so much writing down for this one. But this represents the British Empire as the hand. France, America, Italy, and Japan. They are squeezing Germany to take this pill. All right, so it says the big four pills, and it talks about damages, money, things like that. And the Allies are saying, you've got to swallow it whether you like it or not. Okay, so this is the pill, the medicine, if you like. All right, so the pill is bigger than the guy's head. So to take this pill, you can see in this cartoon, is impossible. All right, it's going to do some serious damage trying to get that pill down the throat of that man. Again, the message is really quite simple. It's going to cause damage. All right, so to take this treatment, if you like, it's going to cause some damage. So it's a less common source, but certainly still one that has a clear message. And we can see if we look at the three men on the box of pills, Clemenceau is the third with a little moustache, David Lloyd George, and we can see as well Woodrow Wilson just standing there holding onto the spoon as well. Okay, so that's an interesting one. This appeared in a British newspaper. So what do we get the idea of in a British newspaper? Do we think perhaps they think the Treaty of Versailles was harsh? Or is somebody criticising the government and the Allies for forcing this kind of treaty onto the German people? All right, so have a little look at that information there. It's really just repeating what we've said. It's harsh and it's going to cause some damage. Okay, this source, a bit more tricky as well, although again fairly obvious. We can see that unlimited indemnity, that is the impact of the treaty economically, the reparations, things like that, have been weighed down onto this horse, this German horse, We know he's Germany because it says Germany on it. He's sweating on his little face. He's really struggling. He's a workhorse. He's a pack horse. And he's trying to do work. He's trying to recover. And then they've got the whip out. The Allies have got the whip. They're shouting at this horse because he's unable to do the work that they're asking him to do. And that's because he's weighed down by the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, so the impact of the cost of the treaty. This poor horse, Germany, wants to get back to work, wants to start producing and recovering, but it just can't because of the weight of the Treaty of Versailles. So again, another source in a British newspaper, a good couple of years later this time, in 1921, really criticising, I think, the Treaty of Versailles, saying that it wasn't good, it wasn't right, it wasn't fair, and actually it's not allowing anybody to move forward. Okay, so already there are signs that the Treaty of Versailles may well be a little bit of a problem. All right, and then lastly, I just love this source as well. Again, pause the screen on this one, maybe annotate, make some notes in your book or on paper, whatever you're doing, of what this shows. There's some subtle issues here, and there's some common themes that we looked at in some of the other sources as well. Okay, so we can see the first thing, again, is Germany is naked. This represents this vulnerability or being stripped of their clothes, of their army, their countries, their empire, colonies, whatever. All of those things, Germany's stripped. So it's stripped again and vulnerable, that common theme that comes through. David Lloyd George, again, he's over there, just away from the guillotine, looking, I think he looks a little bit like, oh, this is a bit harsh. This is not necessarily necessary. He doesn't look particularly thrilled by this, and that's a key bit of David Lloyd George, remember, and he's holding on to the Treaty of Versailles. He's scrolled it up in his hands. He just appears to be like, what have we done? This man is about to be killed. What have we done? So that's possibly how you might look at David Lloyd George there. Over in the other side of the source, we've got Woodrow Wilson. His hands are out. Remember, he's this sort of idealist. He's sort of saying, do we need to do this? Is this necessary to punish Germany so harshly? You can even see in his face a little bit, he's almost trying to plead really with the Allies, with David Lloyd George and Clemenceau, that this is not necessary. All right, and here we go, Clemenceau again with his mustache. He is the one, like the vampire in the bat sauce, with the string. He is the one that is going to kill Germany by pulling the string. Okay, and that's important really. He holds the string that is going to be ultimately killing Germany. And you hopefully will know from the French Revolution course in Key Stage 3 that this is a guillotine. So it's a French weapon, a French execution method. And that's just, again, another nod to the idea that it's France doing the damage. So this source, again, no words, but a hell of a lot going on in this source that we can put our knowledge towards and paint a real good picture of what's happening. And then lastly, this word beginning with D, represented in the fact that his hands are tied behind his back. There's nothing he can do. The diktat. So when Ebert went into Versailles, there was nothing he could do. His hands were literally, or metaphorically rather, tied behind his back, and he had to sign the treaty. So lots of representations of the Treaty of Versailles in this picture, which at first glance is quite straightforward. Actually, it carries an awful lot of content and context to it as well. So now your job, I'd like you to create your own source showing the terms of the treaty. It should have a message, maybe a hidden message, maybe something obvious, maybe something implicit or implied that you want somebody to work out. Obviously, we are not going to swap afterwards. We will have done that in class probably. But certainly you can just have a little look at your message and work it out what you're trying to say. Okay, so that will be a skill in almost doing a source backwards. So you're going to create the source trying to give a message of the Treaty of Versailles, whether it's bad or good. Think about the other sources, look back through this video, take some ideas, and try and create a really clever source that represents the three parts of the Treaty of Versailles that we were looking at. So its impact on Germany, the army, all things like that. Okay. Right, hopefully that was useful to be able to construct your own source. And then just to finish this session, the impact of the Treaty of Versailles on the Weimar Republic was so severe that Germany's economy has been destroyed. That 6.6 billion on top of the 37 billion meant Germany is unable to start any war, which is exactly what the French want. And in fact, to be fair, probably what the Allies want as well. maybe in hindsight the financial punishment was a little bit too much. So their economy is damaged. The government, the new Weimar Republic, is very much hated. This Dolchstoss idea, this November criminals signing the Treaty of Versailles. Eber really is hated for signing this Treaty of Versailles, and they're humiliated. The Germans are humiliated, particularly by having to take the blame for this war. So all things considered, hopefully now after this session, you've got a bit of an idea about how Germany was treated after the war by the Allies, but also how we've just planted that seed that is going to grow into this tree of hatred as the years go on, which is ultimately what's going to allow the Nazi Party to get elected, because people don't forget, and people will suffer for this for a long, long time. All right, thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next session.